Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Poetry at the Point, back online, a monthly reading series organized by the St. Louis Poetry Center. My name is Kenneth Pruitt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm super excited to be with you this evening back in the internet spaces and to bring you the poetry of Dwight Bitikofer, Katy Gordon, and Paul Stroble. Welcome to all of you. I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm really excited to hear your poetry. Before we get started, I have a few of the typical announcements and one atypical announcement. First and foremost, as is already evident to you, our plans to return to in-person events are always in flux. I say that even when I feel pretty confident that we're good to go, because we never know what the pandemic is going to throw at us. So we continue to take things month by month, and in conversation with our poets and other different constituents, we decided to take this month's reading online. So thanks for your continued patience as an audience and sticking with us and enjoying poetry in whatever means we can present it to you. Secondly, we're going to be announcing details for the annual Nash Poetry Contest in February. So please do stay tuned for that on our website and our social medias. I always want to thank our many members and supporters here at the St. Louis Poetry Center. It's very easy to become a member at our website, and that is right down below, stlouispoetrycenter.org/membership. Also, always a big shout out to the Missouri Arts Council, whose support helps to make this series possible each and every year. So if you're watching this in real time, it's 7:32 on January 25th. We're really glad you're here. Pretty please comment and share the link, but also post your questions for the poets themselves, because we hope to have a little time at the end to have a bit of a Q&A session with them after they're done reading, and we would absolutely love to include your questions. If you're viewing this after January, though, or after the 25th, please do still comment and share in the video, because we want to continue to build support for this series as well as for these fantastic poets themselves. And we'll post links on Facebook for you to support these poets. They'll be on your screen too, so that you can access more of their work after the reading is over. So, without any further ado, we're going to move on to some poems. And our first poet this evening is Dwight Bitikofer. He became involved with St. Louis poetry circles in the early 2000s and was active in open mic circles. He's done a number of jazz, in quotes, performances with a jazz musician friend, Raven Wolf C. Felton Jennings II. He has emceed and curated many poetry events, had the opportunity to learn from poets at the University of Iowa's Summer Writing Festival for over 10 years. He served on the boards of the St. Louis Writers Guild and this very St. Louis Poetry Center. Bitikofer has received a number of writing recognitions and publications for his poetry and for his newspaper column. He received an honorary doctorate of letters from his alma mater, Webster University, in 2015. So, Dr. Dwight Bitikofer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kenneth. All right. I self-published a book that came out this past summer, Square Miles and Roundabouts, and the book is all themed on places. Places of the first two poems are going to be place of origin poems, and then that I'll read tonight, and then some other places that a couple other places I've been privileged to visit. I am from blue sky over flat land, township roads, square miles laid in grid. I am from the small white church, separate from the world by the cemetery. I am from grandma's kitchen, the knife, butchering chickens, the yeasty lump of bread dough. I am from the red barn, classic lines built by my grandfather, mud nests of barn swallows. I'm from responsibilities, begun at age 6, watering chickens, filling feed boxes, picking up fallen apples. I am from the open seats of old John Deere's, plowing stubble, mowing hay, cultivating maize. I am from the cherry tree, ripe with fruit in the high branches in June, sour then sweet. I am from wheat sowed in autumn, dull green in winter, oceans of harvest, golden in summer. I am from structure, shaped by fundamentalism, rigidity, tempered by expectations, love, and home-baked pies. I am from the land, windblown, restless, gone now, to a place not where I am from. Next poem is also a place of origin poem on harvest. The kind of June day when harvest begins, wheat threshed, windblown heads, bent waves of sea roll, dust rising from backs of machines, hot sun, old trucks standing by, bounty or pittance, promise of faith sown deep before winter. The kind of June day stretched taut against belts and bearings pulled hard against treachery of concealed mud set to trap combine wheels. The kind of June day, tongues parched and dusty, roadside sandwich meals, combine waddles on, clip sweet straw with heads to be drummed and sieved. The kind of June day all ready to spring, impatient outburst, ready to rush loads, to wait in long lines, small town grain towers. The kind of June night, points of machine light, sound dulled, distant dusk, beyond the dark road, southern horizon, lightning flickering. And we'll move a little bit closer home. In the past 50 years, I've lived here in St. Louis along the Mississippi River, and this poem comes from upriver a ways. It's a little town called LaGrange, Missouri, up between Hannibal and the Iowa border. And I've had occasion to stop there on a number of occasions, driving to and from the Summer Writing Festival up at University of Iowa. This is Mississippi River, LaGrange, Missouri, 7/22/13. Mark Twain's river is lower still today, graded sand by rail tracks, abandoned ore up on the bank where cottonwoods sing in wind, cirrus sky flanked by thunderheads. An oarsman before a Buddha, Siddhartha, watched such a river and listened to its lessons. Pete Seeger, an old songmaker, sang that the gods of moving waters will tell us all they know. Cottonwoods with hollowed holes, clamshells broken open, words unspoken, secrets washed away. This river, we've bridged it, dredged it, locked it, damned it, and goddamned it. It flows. This river carries the trash we give it, runoff, and overflows, funeral processions of dead trees, amid the traverse of laboring loaded towboats. This river carries silt and mud, muck and wisdom. Listen to this river just because. Listen. Next poem is from, we're going to move across to the old country. This is, I have friends in Germany who have a vacation house in Sicily. And I've had occasion to visit there a couple of times on the north coast of Sicily, little tiny village. And clinging to several villages clinging to the side of this mountain, on top of which are the remains of an old castle or fort that was built about 1,000 years ago. And you can hike up there. It's a great hike. Castello Trippi, Sicily, 2017. Remains of crumbling walls atop this cone of mountain, above the villages clinging, a view of a distant sea. Imagine the labor of construction, rocks hauled up the steep path, rocks cut into building blocks, rocks hoisted to make walls. Smell the sweat, hear the curses, see the stream of young men far down the path, buckets hung from shoulder yokes. Feel the tough-skinned fingers dripping blood, cupping water to dry lips. These rocks stained with flesh, torn a millennium ago. These fragments of walls remaining, worn by wind, remembering the tyrannies of their construction, the exhausted lives beaten down. These walls and distant mountains pushing up. All right, those are 4 of about 28 or 29 poems in that book. And I'm going to read several other poems, kind of going a little different vein. The next book that I'd like to do, I want to theme around perspectives, different ways of looking at things. And this poem may be in that book. Hands so like our own. Ripping through flesh and bone, exploding, tempers trigger instruments of death. Fear concealed as protection, justification. Gotcha before you get me. Damage irreconcilable. There is no answer to the echo of the flash, the crash that destroys. Bias feeds fear, pulls triggers before rational counts to 10 might give pause. Good guys with guns wreak havoc, not so different than havoc from bad guys with guns. Political posturing cannot save us from enemies, hands so like our own. And on a lighter note, I think, sort of, my backyard has lots of mole tunnels and mole hills, and wrote this one spring of 2020. A note to you, the mole. Yesterday, I noticed the hole, the beginning of an excavation. I briefly glimpsed a gray-brown body, no more than a match strike of movement that flared and just as quickly disappeared. This was a fire, I thought. I might fight. I unraveled the kinked garden hose and stretched its river pathway so that I might unleash full force 100 gallons of tidal wave down that hole to discourage continued building of tunnels and mounds within and upon my turf, not caring, even hoping you might drown in a dead-end chamber filling with that unwelcome surge of water. Today, the hole is still visible. No new evidence of your mining expedition in my lawn next to the neighbor's fence. A flying thing buzzes the empty hole, and I think of death. For all of us, our building and our undermining stops somewhere. I only hope my own death is not by drowning. And the last poem I'll read tonight, a couple of times in fairly recent years, I have written a poem a day for about 100 days. And of course, the muse isn't always active every day. And sometimes I'm reaching for things to write about. So for this poem, I took one line from each of and rearranged them to create something new. This is called Lines Reimagined. I also did this with some poems from their poets, but this one's mine. Pay attention to synchronicity, she said. Her world is expanding, dream images overlaid with the scent of memories. Fly west, you still have time. Currents and winds point small boats into a roiling Hawaii Pacific. Under a wide and windy sky, drums beat on. The hope for a better past long disappeared. In a straight down leap from a cliff into the sea. Smoke from a dwindling cigarette, a morning web against a door, still wet with rain. Lines I will not read, pages I will miss, until dry leaves meet fire, circles of light concentric, tendrils waving outside a window, free of existential angst, some needy touch netted. Live and let live. Acceptance is our creed. Prayers from dark to sun, voices of healing and drums, the constancy of a North Star, at least for this one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dwight. I really appreciate it. I have been trying to keep track of the comments, and a comment came in about your 100 days in a row practice from Andrea Scarpino. My predecessor is this host and says that's bonkers amazing. I could not possibly agree more. I'm going to ask you more about the craft of that in our conversation at the end. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing this evening. We're going to move on to Katy Gordon, who told me that she is only referred to as Catherine when she is in trouble. So I will not say Catherine Gordon. I will say Katy Gordon studied at the University of Glasgow, where she obtained a PhD in Scottish literature. Her work has appeared in the US and the UK, including most recently in Beloit Poetry Journal. Voices from Their Own Country, the poems of Marian Angus and Violet Jacob, a joint edition of two 20th century Scots poets she edited, is published by the Association for Scottish Literary Studies. Katy, it's all you.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here with you this evening. Thank you to Kenneth and to Aaron for organizing this, and to Dwight and Paul, my fellow readers. It's an honor to be with you today, and to family and friends for venturing out or venturing in. It's lovely to be with you today. I just thought I would start with a poem called A Haibun. It's a combination of a prose poem, usually about a journey, and a haiku. Now, because of COVID, we haven't been doing a lot of journeying recently, so the journeys that I've been taking have been around the back garden. Here we go. Haibun for January. January gets what's left. The holiday colors wrung out and spent or lost on layaway. It's gray every morning, gray at night. Waking at first light, the air's thieving, too wet to take in enough to breathe. So you heave along, lungs and legs, through puddles just shy of freezing. Is that breath or mist or sweat on your face? You navigate by what you can see, but sound too blurs. Mother of pearl to a bright day's shear. When the neighbor's dog barks, it's muffle, not shout. All day, the murderous clamor of squirrels, gray fur, gray tails, gray sky, and their Tudor love affairs, play out in the round, tree, porch, roof, ground. You hope they won't chew their way in. Still, there's beauty here. In the acid etch of leaves on the street, those tannic shadows that won't wash clean, the ruby punch of rowans, birds' nests hung like baubles in the pear and sweet gum trees. Then one lone cardinal, the female's cataract red, coloraturas from the locust tree, notes as round as blown glass beads or bubbles of sound that ascend and ascend in the frozen air. All that's austere, ice scoured, drained, done, spent. Take heart. Here, she sees all, yet sings. And I thought, because tonight is also Burns Night, the celebration of the Scottish poet Robert Burns, and they would take my PhD away from me if I didn't mention that it's an important holiday, that I thought I would read a poem that is rooted in Scottish weather. I lived in Scotland for many years, and I miss its every flavor of rain. And this poem is called Rain. It does have an epigraph from the Scotsman, the Edinburgh paper, which says, a recent Scottish government poll found that the word dreich, meaning dull and miserable weather, was the nation's favorite word. Scots also have more than 400 words to describe snow. Rain. Say muchi, and you'll feel the rain that won't fall, but mooches about in its slicker and hat, its moist lecher's mouth at your ear. Say druket, say stoting, say plowdery for what happens next. That sheeting, spinnial, splash-spired monsoon for soil and you turn soup. I spent a lot of time in Scotland with wet feet. I hadn't figured out the idea that it's important to wear waterproof shoes. I wanted to read a poem also about summer to get us thinking about warmer weather. And this is a poem which is a little bit lost in translation because it's a concrete poem, but it's called Popsicle. And this is for my daughter, who suggested the topic. Popsicle. Eating one is an art. The tilt of the stick so the drips drip onto the ground, not you, hitting the pitch, half slurp, half nibble, lest you smack in a minor key. And finally, the speed. You learn the pace to that last lingering swipe before your teeth hit stick and its sawdust tang. Is that not what life is? Sucking the sweetness from what should burn, what will numb us to our core. I thought that was a cheery poem, but my daughter didn't think it was very cheery. I wanted to read a poem which is a sestina, and sestinas are a poem form that I've become really interested in recently. It's a medieval French form which takes 6 words and repeats them in a kind of dancing and spinning form, a kind of highly ritualized form, where if you write those first 6 lines, then you know what the other end words of the whole rest of the poem will be. And as I said, it results in a kind of spinning format. I will also say, for any small fry in the audience, that kids' play dates and birthday parties in the past, particularly when I was growing up, are not like they are now. They were full of mystifying games, really odd food. Like, people had gift-wrapped plastic cheese that came in individual slices, and strange, very formal parents. So this is a sestina, and it's called Hee Haw. For years, no one thought to ask why they blindfolded us, spun us around, music on, and insisted we tape a paper tail on a paper donkey, stuck to someone's living room wall. We did what we were told. This is fun, parents with cigarettes told us, hissing in our ears. They'd ask, could we see anything? Those macrame wall hangings, the other kids, the hands that spun us like sugared up tops, that donkey with cartoon eyes. Baffled, we whirled on in that fumbling dark. We wanted to be unspinnable. the ones who told the globe when to twirl. But even the donkey, buck-toothed, crooked, would jeer if we'd ask, why a donkey? Why this tail? We simply spun tail in hand and aimed for the wall with that damp, clutched tail. The wall, though, never stayed where we thought it should, as if it too spun a secret planetary orbit no one told us about in science. We learned never ask for help, to find the donkey from the older kids with their donkey brays and mocking shouts. The wall must be there somewhere. Don't ask the adults. They've disappeared with drinks. We'd hope they'd remembered how they told us there'd be cake. So we'd spun revenge tales while the kids spun us around. We'd land the donkey tail spot on. Kids for decades would be told of our prowess. Hear that smack of tail on wall, cheers. Each time we'd stumble, hoping we nailed it, not some cheese plant or chair. Don't ask how there in the dark we knew we'd spun 3 rooms away, how we were still the only donkey there. We didn't ask to play. We did as we were told. I've never understood Spin the Tail on the Donkey. It just never made any sense to me. I don't know if children still play those games today, but it always struck me as a mystifying ritual. One of the high points or the positive thing that has come out of the pandemic has been an opportunity to connect with family and friends through streaming media like this. And one of the delights has been an opportunity to meet with my family on both sides of the ocean. And I have a lot of master gardeners in my family. So I've been really blessed with an opportunity to connect with family and also to learn a lot about gardening. So oftentimes it becomes kind of a gardener's question time. And this poem is for them. And this is called Radish. It should come as no surprise that your name at root means root. You radical sprout with your leafy snoot and trailing rat tail reach. Dependable, you do just what the packet says you'll do. Run seed to fruit in under a month, while the rest of the garden warms its bones in the cold porridge light of March. Staunch, you never miss a day. Cooped up all winter with catalogs of heirloom seeds for sale, we want neon, technicolor, 5-dimensional hues. We want the architecture of a garden in full bloom, trellises buntinged with sugar snaps, swept streets between carrot rows, the strawberries, incessant urban sprawl, those squat cathedrals, the beefsteak tomatoes with heft and somber grace. But it's bare soil we get in the garden plot. We rootle about with bulbs and trowel, trying to remember the dance we do with frost and rabbits each spring. It's all in the timing, you grin, your chapped red mouth working its way up through the ice and slush to speak to us in that old man's throaty croak. We kneel closer now, ear to soil. Come again, we say. I have 2 more poems. I'm going to read one short and one a little longer. This short one here is also a concrete poem, which just imagine it's in the shape of something you'll see in a minute. And it's called Lunar Eclipse, 4 a.m. Awakened by something you could not place, gurgling of plumbing, the settling of bones, you slipped out in the frost to see the moon glide between darkness and light. It shone, snow trundled underfoot, just the corner clipped where the shadow went as your orbits aligned and parted. No one but you and a far-off train awake to see it go. And I'll finish tonight with a poem that is dedicated to my family. This is a poem that it's important to know That hand-me-downs in previous generations are not the great things that they are now. Hand-me-downs in the 70s and 80s were different. They were inspired existential dread, especially if you were on a far down on the chain of hand-me-downs after they'd been through several iterations. This is called hand-me-downs in winter. Another box arrives, spewing corduroys and cowl neck sweaters in questionable stripes. The occasional velvet skirt, stiff with ceremonial lint. Lurking at the bottom, your dread. Someone's clammy boots, breathing out damp air. Broken hasped, waggle-tongued, chill rubber to the touch. They're meant to be worn over shoes, like a snood for the feet, or a desperate decoy to disguise one's path in the snow. Any sleuth would find you, though, in the scrum of snowman rollers in the yard. Yours alone, the ancient galosh print no one's seen for years. Other kids in new red boots or slip-on mucklucks lined with fleece will mock you for your antique shoes. So you pray on your knees every night for the sun's hot mouth to thaw the snow. Thick on the branches like woolly sleeves and scalloping every sill. Let it not snow, not snow, not snow. With snow, you know the class coat room will welter and roil with the collective slosh of kids peeling off all their layers. The cubicles a drool with wet moon boots and a slick of deadweight woolens. Hats, beanies, knitted tams, stray gloves, and a great yarn clot of scarves and tassels and baubles. Everywhere wet, snow melt, hissing radiators, pools of mitten weep. The benches husk like lichen from it all. Let no one notice your hideous dance. One boot on, one boot off, your free foot flapping as you try not to fall or reveal to the world the worst humiliation yet. Your mother's wrapped each foot in its shoe with a cast-off plastic bag. The cheap, bright paint of the bargain bread bag will glow in its halo of crumbs as you free each shoe and try to find a place where you might, quiet-like, hibernate until winter's through. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really lovely. I have to begin by apologizing for being a bad poet and not even realizing that I brought a Scottish literature scholar onto our reading and not realize it was Burns night. So I'll do some penance later. Stick around for our conversation. Thank you again. Last reader for the evening is Paul Stroble, who teaches at Webster University and Eden Theological Seminary. A native of Vandalia in, he'll have to correct my pronunciation if it's Fayette County, Illinois. Okay. He's written several books, and especially church curriculum. His website is paulstroble.com. His poetry published by Finishing Line Press are Dreaming at the Electric Hobo from 2015, Little River in 2017, Small Corner of the Stars also in 2017, Backyard Darwin in 2019, and Walking Lorton Bluff in 2020. And you also, I believe, have something forthcoming as well, Paul. You're welcome to mention that. But Paul, the stage is yours.
All right. Thanks so much, Kenneth. I thought I would start with the forthcoming book that Kenneth just mentioned. It's called, same publisher, Finishing Line Press. Finishing Line Press, oneword.com. If you would like to find my books and a lot of other wonderful poets there too. My book that's coming out this fall, it's called 4 Mile, which is an area of Fayette County, Illinois, where, as Kenneth said, I'm from originally. It was the way to my grandmother's house years ago. It's also the location of a family cemetery where virtually my mother's entire family of the side of the family is buried. So many memories of decoration days, as we called Memorial Day, and putting flowers on loved ones' graves, and also me doing genealogy in high school, much of it in that area. So yeah, 4 Mile is the title of the book, and it's personal responses to the landscape. And I thought I would read just a few poems from the last part of the book, where I kind of summarize, some of my feelings and experiences of the place. Faith, hope, and love, these three. And how great is a place where they took root in you, where God knits cloths of yourself that you recognize in the scenes and the road and the houses and the clouds, and each bird for your visit, its feathers drab or bright. 4 Mile is the dove that first taught me the word melancholy, hoo-hooing grayly along the tangled brush of the fence row, and the spot in the forest where kickapoo hunters danced into the night as the insects and birds cried their own chorus, and the field where 3 1800s children were buried in a corner once fenced off, and the grave of the boy who fought at Vicksburg and heard the bugler play the seventh, and the fence of the old agronomy station with its pump that poured cooled water, and the roadside tree that once stopped a car, the wounded bark healed over as if by the touch of Christ, who comforts all who mourn. 4 Mile is the robin who greets Otsego Township, St. James, and Logatee, who grants orange beauty to the new clematis that hugs the winter firewood beyond the hostas, who lights upon the propane tank and the milk house filled with magazines and the children's swing set up in the back, who loves the place of Duck Curry's antique store, its flow blue and carnival glass and postcards and cherished furniture, who knows the killdeer who nests with worry in the church's gravel parking lot, who knows the chewing cows that gaze at you in contentment and contemplation from beyond the fence, who knows the searching gyres of the dark birds, homely neighbors who cannot sing, who traces bean rows planted surely across the land, who preaches resurrection. 4 Mile is the blue jay who flies from Brownstown, where the Vandalia Railroad once took folks to the St. Louis World's Fair to see the Japan Jerusalem pavilions, where Sam Wade's store and the Stein store and the Rhodey store and the Pilcher store and the Griffith Brothers store and Bingham and Son opened on time for business, where folks went up to McCoy's for lunch and Odell's for wheel repair. The jay that visits the homes once owned by folks who turned down Jack Benny on the radio, even Jack Benny, to talk about the upcoming elections, and the homes with their TVs that reported JFK and MLK, Vietnam, 9/11, COVID, and homes where little kids like me breached mashed potato dams of turkey gravy, wiping out the green beans, and the barns filled with straw and tools handy, and the tractors and combines that the farmers kept running from morning deep into evening, and the jay's noisy call alerts others to the presence of the hawk. 4 Mile is the cardinal, beautiful male and female who call out, "Peace be with you, be not afraid," who visit folks inside of their riding mowers and perched upon the fence wires and the IDOT signs and mailboxes set straight in roadside soil, who travel the country lanes where Bob White burst into startled flight, who gladdens the yards where kinfolk sit on warm evenings before going inside for coffee or iced tea and ginger cookies, where the deer stroll up in twilight to eat your roses, who remind folks that Saturday is the next trip over to St. Louis to see a ball game. And then a couple more poems conclude that set, but that's that's from that book, which, as I say, is coming out this fall. Here's a poem Kenneth once told me he really liked. So yay, Kenneth. Yay, Kenneth, for a lot of things. But this one's called Solomon Snow. And these are some poems that have already been published. Deep snowfall, 10 degrees. Our pastor isn't sure whether to cancel church or not. We're not sure either. No one is. But our neighbor lady lives for the house of the Lord. Snow stacks upon the fields of those who have walked through valleys of shadows, and pastor shepherds them. She perfects her sermon on goodness and mercy, watches, prays, makes a snowman with the youth. Afternoon turns into evening, and the early moonlight is a voice that is not heard but heard everywhere, like the calm of the stars. The timber of the country hills and ravines arrayed more than Solomon. God asks, have you visited the storehouses of snow? Can you loosen the cords of Orion? We make angels in white, loved by the one from whom come the hoarfrost of heaven, channels of snow, Christ in cold. Folks and Pastor phone, let's try to meet. You know Miss Audie will come anyway. And what is snow but still waters? That is from this book, Small Corner of the Stars. This is a lighthearted, if slightly gruesome memory of my father, called Chickens, who one year got the notion that he wanted to butcher his own chickens. Instead of going to the grocery store and buying them like I thought a normal person would. The hatchet falls, but spinal nerves sing a little movement for a minute or two, the flopping, hopping, the spraying. One summer, Dad got the notion to butcher chickens in our backyard. With a fire log set up, he took each living bird, crack, and each held the life's end to make that dying dance. Just aim and don't hesitate, Dad encouraged me. But I delayed until there were no more, and I walked among the fallen, the fresh, the soon to be plucked, cut and frozen, then fried up on weekends as my folks relaxed, saying, I've been running around just like... One called County Seat, which was from another book, Little River, which I didn't know when I was writing it. I didn't know it was going to end the way it did. Sometimes that happens. County Seat. Bicycle tires, small town birds singing in neighbors' trees. A car beeps in the distance. Riding, the boy sees the way the sidewalks have raised as neighbors' trees grew beneath and pushed upward. And as he pauses from his hot ride through undulating streets, he likes the coleus and moss rose that line the walk of 263 6th. Beneath the phone poles lined in matched order down Washington Street, the oak and maple are still in full green shade. He pedals to the outskirts where the expired line crosses St. Louis Street, and he stands in blue to gaze down the bright right-of-way. At the cemetery, folks have already decorated, kin needful of flowers, flags. His grandparents are decorated with forget-me-nots. He remembered this as a bored day, no one around, nothing to do, when his home became for him always as the shadow of God's wings. One more poem that's set in the same backyard as Chickens, but a little more lighthearted. This is called Kryptonite on July the 4th. Metallic green paint from our hobby shop is applied to a pocket-sized stone. Rinse the brush in kerosene, and with that begins the familiar story, the chain reaction in the planet's core, destroying life and the beautiful cities as humanoid Kal-El sails through space, followed by glowing meteors of different colors, non-reactive with oxygen and thus intact, once crashed into places like our backyard to emit gamma radiation that affects Superman's photovoltaic skin cells, stealing his energy, risking his life. The stone was handy for chasing playground girls, likely Phantom Zone refugees, and for boys in the grass, scooping up grasshoppers to catch their spit, and on the best days, kidnapping box turtles for show and tell before they amble away. In summer, he put a cherry bomb beneath the brilliant stone, lit it, ran, and watched kryptonite fly a good 10 feet. No TV for a week. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you for ending on a humorous note. I'm going to ask Erin as she gets everything ready to pull our other poets up. Excellent. Good to see all of you. Thanks for sticking around for a little conversation at the end. I don't know if it was me prompting folks or just the spirit was moving folks in particular ways this evening, but we do have a good handful of questions from our audience. So I'm going to jump right into those. And the first one comes from, I'm going to take from Joe Shaper, and was actually pretty darn close to the first question I'd prepared for y'all anyway, which is, make sure I have it right. She phrased it in terms of everyone touched on landscapes. So why do landscapes evoke words to you? I'm going to take that one step further and be really nerdy and call it something like terroir, right? I mean, not just landscapes, but the climate, the soil, the terrain, the traditions involved, right? All make their way into your work. And I think a lot about that these days in terms of living such a virtual life, right? Like, how do we make sense of writing about place and continuing to value thinking and writing about place when we live in an increasingly virtual world? So I am just going to randomly pick on Paul Stroble because I've known him for longest to kind of begin that.
So landscape, climate. Yeah, with me, it was just, being from this little area in Illinois where, my family had settled for so many generations, and I've been wanting to go over there, and best says don't, because not enough people are vaccinated in Fayette County. And I say, well, yeah, I'm just going to visit dead people anyway, so they're going to be there when I can get there. Yeah, seriously, my parents and grandparents are, and the others are buried there. But yeah, I think it's just for me, and maybe the others can kind of attest to just feelings kind of become mirrored in the landscape and vice versa, and to work the imagination. And
yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a good direction to go. Katy or Dwight, any thoughts on that?
I grew up in the landscape, and the land is part of my roots, part of my being. The earth and the sky, and it's my innate origin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
go ahead.
For me, I think it's a love of trying to find the right word to describe a particular a place that doesn't just talk about the atmospheric conditions or the geographical place, but encompasses what has happened there. I'm the daughter of a history teacher, so history is everywhere. You see it impressed on the landscape. When I read Robert McFarlane's wonderful book, The Old Ways, which talks about landscape and language, and a lot of his work talks about language and about words we don't have anymore in our vocabulary for, whether it's a dialect to describe a kind of land formation, or things that if we live in the city, we become estranged from. And I'm interested in trying to find that language again for my own self, just to get it. I want to get it right. I want to make sure I describe it the right way.
That's interesting. You're bringing to mind something that I used to say often, that I could gauge the state of my mental health by the last time I was able to actually get out of any sort of urban area. And I mean, I know that's particular to how and where different folks grew up, but yeah, that's very true. Okay, I want to move to a question from Andrea Scarpino, who says she'd love to hear about the poet's publishing choices. She knows that Dwight has self-published, and Paul publishes with, I believe, primarily and maybe only Finishing Line. So she'd love to hear about how you all make your publishing choices. And maybe, Paul, I'll start with you, since you were kind of named there at the end.
Yeah, that press accepted my first little book here, Dreaming at the Electric Hobo. I was just practicing submitting, and sent them 20 poems, and they liked it, and I'm like, what? I was just totally taken aback. But before I got into poetry again, I did freelance religious curriculum, and I kind of learned from that it's so fun to have an editor that you like and work with. For the different little gigs that I had, it was always I learned the value of really finding an editor that you like, and having a good work relationship. So that's one reason why it's a great little press over in Georgetown, Kentucky. They publish wonderful things, and that's I just always look forward to working with them again.
Yeah, sounds like relationships are pretty critical to a successful experience.
Yeah.
Dwight, I'd love to hear about kind of self-publishing too. I'm definitely someone who, over the course of the years, I've self-published, I don't know, half dozen, little chapbooks that I think are pretty cool. And I ended up selling them at local record stores. And I know Left Bank Books took a whole handful of them that actually sold pretty well. Subterranean, the kind of the usual suspects here in the St. Louis region, which is just a very different experience, a very different vibe to publishing. So I'd love to kind of hear about that choice from you.
Well, I didn't have any connections with a publishing house, and I'm getting to the age that I thought, well, if I want a book published, I better move forward myself on it. And I did work with a couple of friends from the poetry community who kind of gave me some guidance in choosing poems, and also did some editing and made some suggestions, some changes in individual poems and so forth. And that was very beneficial and appreciated. And I've still found a couple of errors, since publishing, but
it's so painful, right?
But yes, no, I will intend to do the next one the same way, and unless some publisher steps up and said, "We want your work."
That's the way to do it. Yeah, and it's increasingly easy in this day and age to do that, right? So many lovely tools at our disposal to do that. So, Katy, what about you?
So I currently am sending my work for publication in the manuscript form. So, it's a long, complicated, you send it off to different places, hope you find the right place. And you ultimately just want to find the right home for what you think will work best. And so I'm still looking for that as well. And that can be daunting, but, rejection is part of the process. So, you just think, well, all right, they didn't like me. Let's try somewhere else.
Yeah, right. And I think submitting for journals is a whole other conversation we could have another day when I've had maybe more than a glass of water to drink. So the last question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask us to be pretty relatively brief with our answers, because this is another whole reading we could do in and of itself. But Ben Ga, who I know several of you know, an accomplished writer of Japanese forms of poetry. By the way, Katy, when you read your haibun, I thought of Ben too. He asked what is really kind of a permanent question that I keep on my list for poets like y'all, which is, how has the pandemic impacted your work? I'll expand that a little bit and ask it in terms of how has the pandemic informed your poetry, whether that is in terms of process, whether that's in terms of subjects, or whether just your output. I know, Dwight, I've had the opposite effect from, I think I write about one poem every 100 days rather than one poem for 100 days in a row. So let's go reverse order this time. Katy, I'm going to give you the first dibs on that question. How's the pandemic impacted what you do as a poet?
It's been interesting because when, Dwight, you mentioned the writing every day for 100 days, I tried that at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought, well, I'm going to set myself, 40 days, I'll write a quarantine of poems. And I kept going, and it was fantastic because the pressure was a little bit off. And then I thought, well, I don't have to do this. This is for fun. I'm going to see what happens. And what emerged kind of diary of growing dread, really, which is why I didn't read a lot of these poems, because they are sort of, they start off with, it's coming, oh, it's here. And then they get, progressively more bleak. But for me, it was to try out different forms, to look into my, my Louis Turco and say, all right, what can I find in my book of forms? I'm going to try something different, which was exciting to get to know forms that I didn't know as well, or to try things that I had done before but hadn't spent a lot of time playing with. And that's been really exciting for me. I think also there's been a sort of renewed attention to the immediate surroundings in which we find ourselves, because there is an opportunity to travel further afield. And so, everything around one is invested with more significance because it's surrounded by it at all times. So that to me has been exciting, as well as it's broadened my reading, because I've been able to just dip into all kinds of things, especially during lockdown when the libraries were not open. It was a little bit of, what can I find on my shelves that I haven't read? Here's something I haven't read for ages. Let me see. And that also was exciting as a way of gleaning from the landscape around.
That's great. Thanks for that. Dwight, what about you? Besides kind of your streak of production, how else has the pandemic informed what you do?
Those 100-day streaks were both before pandemic. I have not actually written a whole lot during these past 2 years, but I did manage to get a book published, pandemic hasn't affected my writing a lot. It's certainly I have not been going to poetry readings that I used to go to frequently, and I've kind of been freed of the obligation to show up to every poetry reading.
Yeah, sure. Right. Cool. Thank you. Paul, what about you?
Well, I just, not to get too TMI, I guess, but the, my own kind of sense of self and self-worth and creativity have always kind of gone a lot together. I feel really good about life if I'm, if I feel like I've got a project I'm feeling really good about, and the beginning of the pandemic, like, oh great, I won't have to go anywhere. I can just sit at home and with the cats and write, and then when the fatigue and kind of dread began to set in a little bit more, not only kind of looking at the difficulties of the world from a justice viewpoint, but also just the weird identity that many of us have as people of creativity of some sort, that it's, I may be blue and I can't get a vaccine yet, and this is crazy, but I could still write, or or find it like Katy said, find a good book that I haven't read or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, opportunities as well as maybe a more of a sensitivity to the world kind of opens up.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate your honesty. I hope she's watching, but Lizzie Peterson is part of a group of poets I get together and talk about poems with. And I'll be like, I'm happy to get together and talk about poems, y'all, but I haven't really done anything. And she's like, well, I wrote 3 poems this week and I'm excited. I'm like, you know what? I love you, but also go to hell. Like, no, thanks. So anyway, Lizzie, you can harass me about that later. We are at time, but I made the mistake of not asking the last question that I would love to hear from you all, the absolute one that I primed you for. So I promise I'm going to ask it, and Aaron can give me the crook from stage left if I overstep and go a little bit over. But before we close, I wanted to have you all help me gather some paradise. This is a practice that I have borrowed from a podcaster who gathers poets to do a deep dive into one particular poem. But it's just a way for us to kind of boost the signal on something lovely happening in the world of poetry, whether that's a particular poet you recently discovered or a book that you have rediscovered, something that has to do with poems that is bringing you joy and that is creative. So let's go back around the way we came, and I'm going to start with Paul and ask him to gather some paradise.
Well, there's 2 books real quickly. One is Oblivion Banjo, which I love the title, by Charles Wright. I love his poetry, and he has gathered up most of his life's work. And also an anthology, Undocumented. Andrea Scarpino is one of the editors. It came out 2 or 3 years ago, I guess, maybe 2 years ago, but just such a wonderful collection of socially conscious poems that she and her fellow editor have put together. So I'm really dipping into that book quite a lot.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Big shout outs to the St. Louis poetry community. Dwight, what about you?
There's not a lot of new poetry things that I can talk about, but last night I sang a lullaby to my new grandson. I made a video recording and sent it, and then they sent my son and daughter-in-law sent me a video back of, I didn't make him cry, but
certainly to be lauded.
That's a source of joy.
Nice, excellent. Katy, what about you?
So one of the poets whose work I go back to for sustenance and for just pure awe, I think, is the poet A.E. Stallings. Her work in form, it's so gorgeous, it's so beautiful. And also the Scottish poet Norman McCaig. He, is not a new poet, but his work is rooted in place in a kind of luminous, glorious detail, which it's restorative to read. And it's funny sometimes and sometimes sad, but beautiful. So Norman McCaig is a wonderful writer. And this is not a poetry thing, but the BBC podcast Tunnel 29, which tells about an escape from Berlin, from East Berlin into West Berlin, when the wall came up, is just stunning. It uses sound and interviews and sort of recreated sort of soundscapes to help you imagine this time and place. And it isn't poetry in the sense, a traditional sense, but it is amazing storytelling. The quality of the voice really kind of pulls you in. So
yeah,
a couple hours of resonant sound, go for that.
I love it. I will see your podcast and raise you another. My paradise that I've been gathering is hopefully a lot of you have heard of the podcast Commonplace, which is a pretty well-known podcast hosted by Rachel Zucker, an accomplished poet in her own right, who interviews just usually one-on-one other poets. And she effectively, on Commonplace, hosted an episode of another podcast called Keep the Channel Open. And it's just a kind of meandering conversation between folks who do poetry podcasts called The Craft of the Literary Interview. And it's really fascinating, and I'm trying to do more of those myself. So highly recommend that episode. I'll try to find the link and kind of put it on the Facebook comments. So, well, that is all the time we have for this evening. So huge thanks to all three of you, Paul, Dwight, and Katy, for joining us. Please stick around for a couple minutes after we go off the air so that we can thank you properly. Our next reading is going to be February 22nd, everybody. So please do mark your calendars. Our readers are going to be Becky Ellis, Teddy Norris, and Matthew Freeman. And just a reminder, you'll be able to view tonight's reading on Facebook after tonight. So if you are viewing this on down the road, we're really glad you're here too. Thanks to all the poets for sharing their work. Thanks to Aaron Quick, the executive director of the Poetry Center, for turning all of Al Gore's internet gears behind the scenes. And thanks to all of you out there in the internets for choosing to show up this evening or on down the road after the reading to hear and see some poetry. Have a lovely evening.